you had stood on the frostbitten ridge above the eastern pass on the night of the winter solstice in 1372, you would have sworn the earth was breathing. Snow rose in soft, impossible waves. Stones trembled without wind, and a pale, circular glow pulsed beneath the frozen ground like a giant heartbeat. Travelers who camped too close said the same thing when dawn came. Those who slept lightly survived, and those who slept deeply were never found again. Lauren Hale did not believe any of it. Not then. Not until he saw the road move for himself. He had grown up hearing stories of haunted paths, of phantom riders, of mountain spirits carved from ice and anger. But stories were stories. A caravan guard could not afford fear, not when every journey demanded calm judgment. Yet that morning, as he tightened the straps on his horse's saddle and breath curled white from his lips, the silence in the air felt wrong, too thick, too deliberate, like someone holding their breath just out of sight. Edric Vance, the caravan master, walked between the wagons with a limp earned from 20 winters of crossing these lands. He trusted his instincts more than rumors, but even he paused before the mouth of the pass, staring at the long stretch of pale road disappearing into the mountains. "Keep your eyes forward," Edric muttered. "Not on the shadows. The shadows look back." The caravan, 30 men, 12 wagons, 40 horses, moved in a slow, rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow. The air tasted of iron. Distant trees cracked like splitting bone. No birds flew overhead. Even the wind avoided the pass that morning. For hours, they traveled in growing unease, until the sun dipped just enough to make the mountains glow blue. That was when the first lantern flickered. Just one, hanging from the third wagon. A harmless thing, except the flame didn't behave like flame. It bent sideways against the wind, then folded in on itself, narrowing into a thin line before snapping out in silence. Lauren dismounted, approached, and reached for the lantern. The iron was warm, too warm. He stepped back slowly. "Master Edric," he called softly. "The lantern." But the ground answered first. A low vibration hummed under their boots, not violent enough to topple anyone, but unsettlingly alive. Horses shivered. Snow shifted in tiny spirals around their hooves. And then, 20 paces ahead, the road rippled just once, like a sheet of cloth pulled gently by invisible fingers. Every man in the caravan froze. The ripple came again, slower this time, as if something enormous moved beneath the earth, its shape rising then flattening as it passed under the snow-covered stones. A shape too smooth to be natural, too deliberate to be chance. Edric looked at Lauren, fear finally showing in his eyes. "It's not the mountain," he whispered. "It's the road." One of the men, a young merchant's son named Bram, panicked and broke from the line. He sprinted toward the ripple, as if to prove it false, screaming something none of them fully heard over the thundering in their ears. Halfway across the path, Bram's voice stopped. His footsteps stopped. Everything stopped, because the ground beneath him, simply wasn't there anymore. Like paper burned from the center, the snow, earth, and stone gave way in a perfect circular drop. Bram vanished without a single sound, no scream, no collapse, no echo, just gone, into a darkness that swallowed him like a closing eye. Lauren stumbled backward, heart slamming hard against his ribs. Men yelled. Horses reared. Someone dropped a torch, and the moment the flame touched the ground, the earth beneath it rippled again, faster this time, like something eager, something waking. Ride, Edric roared. Ride and don't look back. The road behind them began to pulse. Sections sank. Others rose. A deep groan rolled through the mountains, as though stone itself protested their presence. Lauren mounted his horse, gripping the reins until his knuckles went white. The caravan exploded into motion, wheels skidding, hooves scraping ice, men shouting prayers to saints who likely had no influence here. But as they fled, Lauren dared one last glance over his shoulder. For a heartbeat, beneath the shifting snow, he saw something impossible. A ring of faint blue symbols glowing in a circle around the sinkhole. Symbols no one alive in their world should have known. And in that moment, Lauren understood one terrible truth. The caravans hadn't been taken by bandits, storms, or spirits. They had been taken by whatever was beneath the road. And now it had noticed them too. Snow lashed against their faces as the caravan thundered away from the collapsing stretch of road, wheels bouncing over uneven ground, horses slipping and scrambling to stay upright. The world behind them roared with shifting earth deep, grinding, hungry. It felt like the mountain was alive and turning in its sleep, aware now of their presence, listening. Lauren leaned low over his horse's neck, whispering to steady the animal as it breathed in ragged bursts. Men shouted directions, curses, prayers. No one dared slow down. Not until the first ridge finally came into view. High ground, solid rock. A place where the earth could not move beneath them. They reached it as the last trace of daylight died. The caravan stumbled to a halt between a cluster of tall black pines. Horses trembled so violently that some nearly collapsed. Wagons were checked, counted, recounted. One was missing. Bram was missing. 2 horses gone. A barrel had cracked open, spilling precious grain into the snow. Edric dismounted slowly, his legs shaking under him. He stared down at his glove, noticing only then that it was torn and stained with something pale and dust-like, stone dust, but finer, almost like ash. Lauren approached him quietly, waiting for orders that never came. Edric only spoke when his breath steadied enough to form words. "No one goes back to the pass," he said. "Not at dawn, not ever." Another guard, Rorik, a broad man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, stepped forward. "What did we see?" he demanded. "Tell us straight, Edric. The road, that thing, what was it?" Edric looked at each man in turn before replying. "I don't know. And that is the worst part. Ahead heavy silence fell over the group. Snow drifted down around them, soft, soundless, uncaring. Lauren sat near the edge of the camp, looking back toward the pass they'd escaped. From here, it was just darkness. No glow, no shifting ground, no sign that anything unnatural had occurred. It looked like a normal stretch of mountain road, quiet, white, peaceful. A lie. He clenched his jaw, trying to steady his breathing. The memory of the symbols burned at the back of his mind, thin, elegant lines of faint blue, arranged in a circle beneath the snow. They were not markings made by nature or accident. They were deliberate, designed, ancient, and moving. Something about them felt familiar, though he couldn't explain why. Like a fragment of a story he had once heard long ago, he tore his gaze away when he sensed someone standing beside him. It was Myra. She had traveled with the caravan before, an herbalist and healer with sharp eyes, quiet steps, and a sense for danger that surpassed even Edric. Her cloak was dusted with snow, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked softly. Lauren nodded. "Did you?" "Only a glimpse," she murmured, "but enough. Edric won't say it, but this wasn't chance. Roads don't move on their own. Mountains don't swallow men without reason." Lauren hesitated. "What do you think it was?" Myra did not answer immediately. Instead, she knelt, pressing her palm into the snow as though feeling for something. Her fingers lingered there a long moment before she finally spoke. "There's an old legend," she said quietly. "Older than the kingdoms we know. Older than the maps we follow. My grandmother told it to me once about pathways built long before our roads, long before our world looked like this. Pathways that slept beneath the earth. Why would a pathway need to sleep? Because," she whispered, "it wasn't built by men." Lauren's breath halted. Before he could ask more, a sudden crack split the air, sharp, close, dangerous. The guards jumped to their feet. Hands flew to weapons. Horses snorted and stamped nervously. Another crack. Then a low groan, like something dragging across stone. Everyone froze. The sound wasn't coming from the pass. It was coming from the trees behind them. Lauren felt his heartbeat thrum painfully against his ribs. Myra rose slowly, eyes scanning the darkness. Edric grabbed a lantern, shielding its flame with his hand as he stepped closer to the tree line. For a moment, the world was utterly still. Then movement. A shadow stumbled out from between the trees, collapsing into the snow with a muffled cry. Men rushed forward, weapons ready, only to halt in shock. It was a man, a single traveler cloaked in tattered furs, face white with terror, eyes wild and unfocused. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. "It followed me." Edric knelt beside him. What did? Speak clearly. But the man wasn't looking at Edric. He was staring at the road behind them. And then, with a voice scraped raw from fear, he whispered, "The ground wakes at the sound of footsteps." His body went limp, and somewhere far behind them, deep in the dark pass they had fled, the earth shuddered again, long, slow, hungry. Lauren felt ice crawl down his spine. Something beneath the mountains was moving toward them, and it had already learned how to find them. The man's body lay still in the snow, his breath fatting into the cold air like smoke from a dying fire. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the horses stood frozen, their ears tilted toward the pass, as if they too felt the distant tremor beneath the earth. Edric slowly closed the man's eyes, his hand trembling. "He didn't freeze," he murmured. "He died of fear." Myra knelt on the other side of the corpse, fingertips brushing the torn fabric of his cloak. "This man wasn't traveling alone," she said. "These tears, these burn marks, he ran, while something scraped against him." Lauren exhaled shakily. "Burn marks. There was no fire." "That's the point," Myra whispered. "Something else made them." The night pressed in around them, thick and heavy. Every tree looked like a lurking figure. Every shadow felt too full, too patient. Rorik, the scarred guard, finally broke the silence. "We can't stay here." "And where do you suggest we go?" Edric snapped. "Back the way we came, into that thing's jaws." "No," Rorik growled. "Away, as far as the horses can run." "Running won't help," Myra said, standing. "Not if it tracks sound." She touched the dead man's cloak again, voice tight. "If he's telling the truth, every broken twig, every crunch of snow, every wagon wheel, that thing hears all of it." Lauren felt his stomach twist. "So what do we do?" Myra looked at him, her face pale in the lantern light. "We become silent." A low murmur rippled through the guards. Silent, in a frozen forest, with horses, wagons, supplies. Impossible, but the next sound cut all protest short. A distant, rhythmic thud, slow, heavy, deliberate, coming from the direction of the pass. The earth quivered underfoot. Snow slid from tree branches. The horses jerked against their reins, eyes rolling white in terror. Edric's face drained of color. "It's moving toward us." The thudding grew louder, not like footsteps, but like something enormous pushing through layers of earth. A body shifting beneath soil and stone, moving with purpose, hunting. Lauren stepped back instinctively. How far away is it? Myra closed her eyes, listening. Not far enough. Edric turned to the guards. "We abandon the wagons. Take only what you can carry. Move light, move fast." "No," Myra said sharply. "Fast is loud." Edric stared at her, torn. "Then what, Myra? What do you want us to do, walk on the air?" She held his gaze, unblinking. "No, we walk on the trees." A stunned silence. "What?" Rorik barked. "You expect 40 grown men to climb branches like squirrels." "Not the branches," she said, pointing deeper into the woods. "There's an old hunter's path near here. A ridge trail, narrow, but high. Our steps will fall on stone, not snow. If it follows sound, we'll leave none behind." Edric hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Lauren, Rorik, you're with me? Clear the way. The group moved quickly into the forest, leaving the dead man where he lay. There was no time for burial, no time for prayers. The living had only one command: be quiet. The trees thickened. Darkness wrapped around them like a cloak. Snow muffled their movements, but every crackle of frost underfoot felt like thunder. Lauren led the way with Myra at his side, guiding him through the underbrush. Behind them, the caravan formed a long, trembling line, men clutching packs to their chests, hands gripping reins, horses breathing in controlled, terrified silence. Then they reached it, the ridge, a narrow spine of stone rising above the forest floor, curving like the back of a great buried serpent. Bare rock, no snow, no crunch, no sound. Perfect. One by one, the caravan climbed onto it. Lauren helped lift frightened horses up the slanted edge, Rorik steadying wagons as they were stripped of goods. Myra scattered pine needles over their tracks to hide the signs of their passage. The thud beneath the earth grew louder and closer. When the last man scrambled onto the ridge, Myra whispered, "Don't look back, just go." They began moving, slowly, carefully, step by step along the silent stone spine. The forest below buzzed with tension. Snowflakes drifted like whispered warnings. Somewhere far behind them, the earth split with a muffled, grinding crack. Lauren forced himself not to turn, but he heard it, a long, dragging inhale, like the breath of something vast and ancient rolling through the forest floor. Then a soft, wet sound, as if something enormous had surfaced from under the earth. A shape shifted between the trees, large, low, and impossibly smooth, moving without footsteps, sliding over the ground like living stone. Myra's hand gripped Lauren's arm. "It's searching," she breathed. The creature, or whatever slept beneath the pass, slid through the forest, pausing where the caravan had stood minutes before. Snow collapsed softly where it drifted close, sucked downward as if by an unseen mouth. Then it began following the trail they had left on the snow. Rorik hissed, "It's coming straight for us." "No," Myra whispered, eyes wide. "It's following the sound we already made." Lauren felt his heart pound so loudly, he feared it would betray them. They kept moving in absolute silence, breath shallow, steps careful. But the creature was gaining. Closer, closer. A low rumble slid across the ground beneath them as the forest shook. Lauren tightened his grip on the rock ridge, cold sweat running down his spine. And then the creature stopped, just below them, directly beneath the ridge. Every man froze. Myra leaned close to Lauren, her lips barely moving as she whispered the most chilling words yet. "It knows we're here." The forest held its breath. No wind, no birds, no shifting branches, only the presence, immense, patient, and unbearably close, waiting beneath the ridge. as if listening to the heartbeat of every living thing above it. Lauren's fingers dug into the cold stone. His lungs throbbed for air he dared not draw. Around him, 40 men and dozens of horses stood petrified, frozen mid-step. Even their breaths seemed to tremble silently inside their chests. The creature, whatever shape it truly possessed, moved with a slow, deliberate scrape, as if dragging its massive body through layers of soil and roots. Snow on the forest floor sank and rose with each movement. It was smelling for them, or feeling their warmth, or hearing the faint rush of blood beneath their skin. Myra's whisper barely existed. "Don't move." For a moment, Lauren wasn't sure whether she was speaking to him or to herself. Below them, the creature's shadow shifted, long, wide, and disturbingly smooth, like a great stone disk sliding beneath the earth. It paused, flattening itself beneath the ridge. The ground bulged upward just slightly, enough for Lauren to feel the stone under his boots tremble. Then, a thin crack split the rock beneath him. Just a hairline fracture, but it made a sound, a tiny sound, soft as a fingernail tapping glass. The creature reacted instantly. The forest floor erupted in a swell of snow and debris as something surged upward, slamming against the underside of the ridge with a hollow, seismic boom. Horses reared in panic. Men clamped hands over their mouths to muffle screams. Lauren staggered, gripping Myra's arm as the ridge shook violently. Rorik hissed through clenched teeth, "Move." "No," Myra whispered sharply. "If we run, it will chase." The creature shoved upward again, harder this time. The ridge groaned, stones cracking under the pressure. A section of the rock spine behind them splintered like brittle bone. Splinters of stone rained down into the forest. Another strike, and the ridge buckled. The creature wasn't trying to climb. It was trying to break the ridge apart from below. Edric leaned close to Lauren, voice trembling. "We can't stay here. It'll bring the whole ridge down." Myra shook her head violently. "If we run on the rock, it hears us. If we run on the snow, it hears us louder." "Then what?" Edric hissed. "What's left?" Myra hesitated. Then her eyes lifted, searching the dark line of trees ahead. Dense pines, tall, ancient. Their branches intertwined like a woven canopy. "We go up," she whispered, "into the trees." There was no time to argue. The ground convulsed with another violent push. A slab of rock behind them collapsed completely, dropping into a gaping hole where earth sank like a throat swallowing. The creature slid forward beneath them, following the fracture line. Lauren grabbed Myra's hand and helped her scramble higher up the ridge toward a low-slung branch thick enough to hold weight. Rorik pushed men upward with brute strength. Edric shoved terrified horses toward the base of nearby trees, cutting their reins so they could climb naturally or run silently. Men clambered into the branches, gripping bark, pulling themselves higher. Snow dumped down from shaking limbs onto their faces, but muted their movement. The ridge trembled again, then split further, half collapsing into the forest below. The creature surged upward, a swell of earth rising like a monstrous hill. Snow cascaded off its back, revealing flashes of something smooth beneath stone, or metal, or something older than both. Lauren climbed fast, Myra right behind him. His hands scraped bark, skin tearing on sharp edges. Above him, a thick branch bent as multiple men clung to it, the wood creaking dangerously. Below, the forest floor bulged and cracked. Something immense glided under the collapsing ridge, circling, searching. Lauren pulled himself to the next branch, and his foot slipped. Not far, just half a step, but enough. A pebble fell, a single pebble. It hit a stone outcrop below with a sharp, perfect talk. Every soul in the trees stopped breathing. The creature reacted instantly. The forest floor exploded upward as a colossal, disc-like shape burst from below, snow scattering in a white storm, roots ripping free, trees bending under the force. Its smooth upper surface glowed faintly with blue lines, the same symbols Lauren had seen beneath the pass. Ancient, precise, alive. It tilted, turning as if it had senses along its edge rather than eyes. And then it lifted, not fully out of the ground, but enough for its surface to rotate slowly, like a great ear listening for them. Myra clung to the branch beside Lauren, her voice barely a breath. It's hunting sound, any sound, even breath. But we can't stay like this forever, Lauren whispered. No, she said, we can't. A cracking noise echoed behind them. A heavy-set merchant lost his grip. The branch beneath him snapped slightly. He didn't fall, but the sound was sharp. Too sharp. The creature rotated toward the noise. Then it lunged. Not like an animal, not like a human, but like an avalanche given purpose, sliding, surging, pouring upward with unstoppable force. The tree exploded at its base. Men screamed silently as the entire trunk shuddered. Branches cracked like ribs snapping. Lauren reached for the merchant, grabbing his arm before he plummeted. He held on with all his strength, bark cutting into his palms, the weight pulling his shoulder almost out of its socket. Below them, the creature reared back for another strike. Myra's eyes widened as she clung to a higher branch. Voice a broken whisper. It's learning. It knows where we are. The forest shook as the creature surged upward again, and the tree began to fall. The tree tilted with a long, groaning crack, bark splitting, as it leaned past its own weight. Snow fell in a glittering sheet around them, and for a moment, the world moved in terrifying slow motion. Branches bending, roots snapping, men clinging desperately to whatever they could reach. Lauren held the merchant's arm with both hands now, teeth gritted, muscles burning. The man's eyes were wide, wild with panic, his boots kicking uselessly in the air. Below, the creature slid backward, coiling itself like a vast, living plate hidden beneath the soil. It was preparing to strike again. Lauren could feel it in the ground. A gathering tension, like the earth holding its breath. Myra's shout was barely a whisper. Jump to the next tree now. The merchant's grip slipped. He screamed no words, just a raw human sound of terror. And that sound sealed his fate. The creature struck upward in a violent burst. The entire lower half of the tree exploded into splinters as something beneath the earth heaved upward. The merchant was torn from Lauren's grasp and swallowed instantly between the collapsing roots, vanishing into a shower of snow and shattered wood. Lauren jerked backward, almost losing his own hold, fingers scraping bloody against the bark. Myra reached down and grabbed his forearm with surprising strength. Climb, she hissed. It's coming up the trunk. The creature moved beneath them like a rising tide of earth. Snow rose in waves, rocks cracked open, and the entire forest floor trembled in concentric rings around the shattered tree stump. The tree lurched again, falling now, truly falling, its roots ripped clean from the ground. Lauren and Myra scrambled upward and leapt. For a terrifying heartbeat, Lauren was weightless, air rushing past, hands grasping for anything. His fingers closed around a rough branch. His body slammed against the trunk of the next tree, pain shuddering through him. He nearly slipped, but Myra caught the back of his tunic and hauled him upward. Below, the falling tree crashed against the forest floor with a thunder that echoed through the mountains. Snow plumed into the air like smoke from a great fire, but the creature didn't stop. It surged beneath the fallen trunk, pushing it aside like a toy. The trunk cracked in several places, splitting under its weight. Blue lines flashed faintly across its smooth surface as it adjusted its orientation, rotating, seeking them. The caravan, scattered through the branches above, clung to silence with white-knuckled desperation. No one dared cough. No one dared cry out. Even horses, high in the trees like frantic shadows, trembled without sound. The creature began gliding through the forest beneath them, circling the base of the tree they now clung to. Its upper surface was not flat. Lauren could see that clearly now. It had ridges, almost like interlocking plates, shifting silently against one another. Snow melted on contact with it, hissing softly before evaporating entirely. Myra leaned close to Lauren's ear, whispering so faintly it was almost thought instead of sound. It's not alive as we know life. It's built. He stared at her, stunned. Built by who? Not by anything from this age, she breathed. The creature paused beneath them, then tilted. Not upward, sideways. It was listening, feeling, calculating. Lauren's pulse hammered so loudly he feared it would betray him. Behind them, Edric whispered to the nearest men with trembling lips, "We can't stay here. If it brings down this tree, it'll kill us one by one." Rorik gripping a branch above Edric, nodded sharply. We need distance, higher ground, somewhere it can't break, or somewhere it won't go, Myra murmured. Lauren glanced at her. Where would that be? She pointed not down, not ahead, but up the mountain, through the trees, barely visible beneath the moonlight. The jagged outline of a cliff face loomed. At its center was a narrow opening, like the mouth of a cave with stone columns carved in strange, twisting shapes that looked eerily similar to the glowing symbols Lauren had seen under the pass. Lauren's breath caught. That place, what is it? Old, Myra whispered. Older than the kingdoms. Older than any caravan route. Edric followed her gaze and paled. You want us to go into that? It might be the only place it won't follow. A sudden crack snapped the air. The creature smashed into the base of their new tree, sending tremors up the trunk. Bark rained down. A man 3 branches below them lost his grip and fell, but caught another branch before making a sound. Everyone froze again. The creature waited, listening. It struck the trunk a second time. Harder. The bark began to split. The tree swayed dangerously. Myra grabbed Lauren's hand, her voice a breathy command. Move now. One by one, silently, the caravan began a desperate, perilous journey from tree to tree, moving from branch to branch like nocturnal animals, climbing higher toward the cliff. The forest below roared with the creature's silent fury. It moved beneath them like a hunting shadow, weaving between trunks, smashing at roots, collapsing smaller trees entirely. But they kept climbing, higher, farther, toward the cave mouth, carved with ancient symbols. Lauren reached the base of the cliff first, breathing hard but silent. He pressed himself against the cold stone and looked back. The creature was still circling, still searching, still listening. It had not yet realized they had gone upward again. Myra climbed beside him, her hand brushing ancient carvings that pulsed faintly under her touch, almost like veins glowing beneath stone skin. Lauren, she whispered, a tremor in her voice. This wasn't made to hide from that thing. He turned to her, confused. Then what was it made for? She looked at the glowing symbols, eyes wide, voice barely a breath. To control it. A cold wind curled through the broken arches as Jean lifted his torch and whispered, If you feel anything at all, don't run. That's how the last group died. The flame sputtered, and for a heartbeat, the entire monastery seemed to breathe. Then the darkness settled again, thick as wet wool, and the story moved deeper into the hidden place where the living rarely dared to stand. The tunnel narrowed, its stone walls carved with grooves that looked like claw marks, though Jean kept telling himself they were made by tools ancient, forgotten tools. Still, the marks pulled at his imagination, as though centuries-old fingers had dragged along these walls in haste or warning. Behind him, the 2 monks who agreed to guide him shuffled nervously, whispering prayers meant to steady trembling minds. Their voices didn't echo. They were swallowed instantly, as though the air itself refused to carry sound. Jean stepped forward anyway. The smell changed first. Wet dust, old iron, a faint metallic sweetness, then something else. Something faintly like incense, but burned down to its bones. The torchlight fell upon a carved figure on the wall. Its face eroded beyond identity, but its hands still lifted in a posture neither of prayer nor surrender. It looked pleading, and Jean had stared at enough medieval iconography to know this wasn't meant for worship. This was a warning sign. They reached a chamber where the ceiling opened slightly, allowing a beam of moonlight to fall like a single silver column. Beneath it stood an altar, cracked, scorched, and still bearing the stains of something darker than time. A ring of symbols circled the platform, cloth-thin lines that didn't match any language Jean had encountered in his studies. But the monks recognized them. The younger of the two whispered. Those marks were seen in the chronicles of 1347, just before the Black Wind. Jean stopped. The Black Death. The monk shook his head. No, something older. But Jean could not be distracted. He approached the altar. His torch flickered again. No, not flickered. It bent. The flame pulled sideways, toward the crack in the stone floor, as if drawn by a slow inhalation from beneath the earth. The floor breathed again. A sound rose beneath them. Not wind, not water. A rhythmic, dragging noise, like something with weight forcing its way across stone. The monks backed away instantly, crossing themselves again and again. Jean stood frozen, more curious than frightened, and that curiosity proved costly. The crack widened a fraction. A presence drifted out, cold, deliberate, ancient enough to make Jean's bones ache. He staggered backward as shadows poured from the fissure, gathering in the chamber's center like ink dropped into water. The monks bolted back down the corridor, sandals slapping stone. Jean reached for them, but could not move. Something rooted him in place. The shadows curled upward, forming a towering figure without shape, as though the dark had been sculpted by trembling hands. Then a voice, not spoken aloud, but pressed directly against Jean's mind, whispered, "You woke us too soon." Jean's torch went out. Darkness slammed over him. He didn't remember hitting the floor, only waking moments later, as the monks dragged him into the upper cloister, gasping for breath. The air outside felt violent in his lungs, too bright, too loud, as though he'd returned from somewhere without sound or color. Bells rang in the distance, midnight bells, but struck out of rhythm, as though the tower itself was trembling. The monks refused to speak. Jean tried to stand and felt something shift in his coat pocket. He reached inside. A stone shard, black as pitch, cold as winter steel. It pulsed faintly, like a small, wrong heartbeat. He dropped it instantly. It didn't fall. It hovered an inch above the ground, spinning slowly, humming with the same rhythm he had heard beneath the floor. And from the monastery's depths, that dragging sound echoed again, closer this time. Jean realized then with full clarity. The monastery had never been abandoned. It had been sealed, not to keep people out, but to keep something else in. And now the seal was broken. Night deepened outside. Wolves howled in the distant forest. Bells tolled again, this time all at once, ringing so violently that stones shook loose from the tower. Jean, breathing hard, whispered the truth he had not wanted to admit. This wasn't a relic, it was a lock. Behind them, the ground trembled. The shadows had begun to rise. Jean stumbled backward as the hovering shard rotated faster, the faint hum sharpening into a thin, metallic whine that scraped at his nerves. The older monk, Father Morton, grabbed him by the shoulder and forced him toward the courtyard. "Move," he hissed, eyes wide with a fear far too practiced, as if this was not the first time he'd seen darkness take shape. The courtyard looked different now. The moon seemed lower, swollen, casting shadows that didn't match the shapes of the buildings. They bent at wrong angles, stretching like talons across the grass. The bell tower continued to ring, every strike echoing as if underwater. Jean pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound sank through his skin, vibrating in his bones. "What is happening?" Jean gasped. Father Mortain turned to him with the expression of someone carrying knowledge that had crushed stronger men. "You were not supposed to see the chamber. That place was sealed in 1351, after the order tried to bury what they had summoned." Jean stared at him. "Summoned, you mean?" Before he could finish, a deep groan rippled through the earth. Tiles cracked across the courtyard, splitting as dark tendrils seeped up like smoke, turned solid. The younger monk, Brother Caldus, collapsed to his knees. "It's awake," he whispered. After 600 years, Jean backed away, but the tendrils coiled, sensing movement. One curved toward him, though it cast no shadow on the ground, as if it didn't belong to the world at all. It brushed his boot cold, but not the cold of wind or winter. This was the cold of graves forgotten under nameless soil. "Run," Mortain shouted. They darted through the cloister archway, sprinting past ancient frescoes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. Figures painted centuries earlier twisted subtly, their eyes following Jean as though pleading or warning. His breath tore in and out, each step echoing with the vibration, still pulsing from the shard he dropped. Behind them, something slammed against the ground, the weight of a creature made of shifting darkness. The monastery shook. "Where are we going?" Jean shouted. "To the library," Mortain answered. Jean almost laughed. It was absurd. But Mortain's tone allowed no space for disbelief. The library doors stood tall and iron-bound, etched with symbols like the ones encircling the altar. Mortain traced one with his finger, muttering a prayer that didn't sound like Latin. The doors creaked open. Inside, the air felt older, denser, as though the room held its breath for centuries. Rows of manuscripts and crumbling parchment lined the walls. Mortain rushed toward a heavy oak chest and threw it open. Inside lay a collection of scrolls bound by red twine. He pulled out one darkened with age, its edges cracked. "This is the Chronicle of the Night Seal," Mortain said. "Written by the last survivor of the original order." Jean scanned it. The ink looked almost fresh, as though the writer had been alive far more recently than 6 centuries ago. Across the top, a single passage was highlighted with strokes of dried ochre. "We sealed it not because we could destroy it, but because it grows stronger when seen." Jean froze. Stronger when seen. He looked at Mortain slowly. "Then, when we entered that chamber," Mortain nodded grimly, "we fed it, woke it. A new sound crawled through the monastery, the scraping of stone, the whisper of something pulling itself along the walls. They turned. At the far end of the library hall, a shape congealed from shadow. Tall, bending at impossible angles. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a hollow space, like someone had erased its features with shaking hands. Brother Caldus screamed. The thing tilted its head. The torches died out one by one. Jean grabbed Mortain's arm. There must be something in that scroll, something to stop it. Mortain flipped desperately through the brittle pages. Spells in dead languages, diagrams of sealed circles, warnings scrawled by men who'd clearly lost their minds. Then, at the very bottom, a symbol Jean recognized. The shard, a drawing of the same black stone he had carried. Below it, a line of text. "Return the heart to the mouth of the earth, and the breath shall cease." Mortain snapped the scroll shut. "We must go back." "You mean back to the chamber?" Jean said, horrified. The shadow creature took a step toward them. Its movement, like ink spilling in slow motion. Mortain looked Jean in the eyes. "If we do not," he said, "the world outside these walls will meet what we have woken." Jean swallowed, throat tight, heart clawing at his ribs. The creature's steps grew closer. He nodded. Together, they bolted toward the door, just as the creature lunged. Mortain slammed the library doors shut, just as the creature collided with them. The impact shook the iron hinges so violently that dust rained from the ceiling. Jean didn't wait. He grabbed Mortain and called us by their robes, and the three sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps echoing like frantic drumbeats. Behind them came a sound that froze Jean's blood. Not a roar, not a scream, a slow, deliberate inhaling, like something savoring the scent of fear. The torches along the walls guttered and died as they passed, snuffed out by a presence that fed on light. The air grew colder, each breath burning their lungs. "We don't have much time," Mortain gasped. "When it breaks through, it will not chase us. It will spread." Jean didn't want to ask. "What does that mean, spread?" Mortain's voice cracked. "It dissolves into darkness and moves like a sickness. Villages vanish. Towns wake up empty. People disappear without sound. They recorded it in 1349 before the order sealed it." Jean felt his spine lock. the Black Death Year, the same time when thousands disappeared without explanation. They reached the cloister courtyard again and stopped. The shard was glowing, hovering above the cracked stones like a piece of a fallen star. It pulsed slowly, each flash sending ripples of darkness across the ground. The cracks in the earth widened with every beat, like a heartbeat sinking with something deep below. Jean breathed. It's calling to whatever is under the monastery. Caldus stepped forward, or whatever wants to come out. Another tremor rippled through the ground. The distant sound of collapsing stone echoed through the halls. The creature had broken out of the library. Mortain grabbed Jean's shoulder. We need the shard. The scroll is clear without it. The seal cannot be restored. Jean sprinted toward the floating stone. The air around it felt wrong, not cold, not warm, but empty. A vacuum in the shape of a heartbeat. His fingers brushed the surface. A scream tore through his skull. Not from outside, from inside. For a moment, he wasn't standing in the courtyard. He wasn't standing anywhere. He was falling. Darkness rushed past him like an endless tunnel. Shapes flickered, shattered columns, pits full of bones. A sky cracked open like a broken mirror. Voices murmured in languages he'd never heard. And at the bottom of everything, something huge opened a single eye. Jean's vision snapped back. He collapsed, gasping. Mortain knelt beside him. What did you see? Jean couldn't speak. He only whispered. The world under this world. Caldus shrieked. Jean turned. The creature slid into the courtyard, its body spilling through the archway like liquid shadow. It had grown. It now scraped the ceiling, its limbs elongating, dripping darkness like tar. Where its face should have been, a hole widened, an absence pulling the air toward it. Mortain lifted Jean. You have the shard. We run now. They hurled themselves toward the monastery's lower gate, the path back to the chamber. The creature moved without sound, gliding as though the ground didn't matter. Shadows bled outward from its steps, creeping up the walls. Jean tightened his grip on the shard. It vibrated violently, as though reacting to the creature's proximity. They rushed down a winding staircase, lit only by moonlight, filtering through ruined slits in the stone. Mortain shoved open a heavy wooden door, and the stale, icy air of the underground corridors flooded over them. They descended. The twisting passage seemed narrower now, the shadows thicker. The carved walls seemed to pulse with faint movement, as if old stone remembered what had once crawled across it. Jean swallowed hard. They reached the chamber, but something had changed. The altar was glowing, pale and sickly. The crack in the stone floor had widened into a jagged wound. Cold air rushed upward in intervals, breaths of a sleeping beast stirring. Jean felt the shard pulling him forward. Caldus whispered, "Put it back before it fully opens." Mortain held Jean's arm. "You must place it directly into the fissure. That is the heart. Return it, and it sleeps." Jean stepped forward. The creature entered the chamber. Its presence bent the air. The torches behind them extinguished instantly. Darkness swallowed the room until only the glow of the shard and the crack remained. The creature spoke, not with a voice, but with gravity tugging at Jean's thoughts. "Return it, and you return us. We breathe through the wound you fear. Let it open." Jean fell to his knees, not in fear, because the shard was burning against his palm, and he suddenly saw memories that were not his. Monks sealing the chamber in terror, villages emptied overnight, a darkness spreading like ink in water, and the creature, this ancient thing, rising through cracks in the world, wherever someone dug too deep. His hand trembled over the fissure. Mortain shouted, "Do it now." The creature lunged. Jean plunged the shard into the crack. The chamber exploded with light. The ground screamed. The walls buckled. The creature convulsed, its form twisting violently, dissolving into streaks of shadow that clawed at the air. The fissure inhaled one final time, deep enough to suck the torches toward it, and then slammed shut with a thunderous crack. Silence. The creature was gone, or sealed. Jean collapsed, chest heaving. Mortain and Caldus dragged him backward as dust drifted down like falling snow. The glow faded. The chamber returned to darkness. After a long, trembling minute, Jean whispered, "Is it over?" Mortain didn't answer, because the floor beneath the altar pulsed once, softly, slowly, like something sleeping, not dead, waiting. Jean lay on the cold stone floor, every muscle trembling. His fingers still tingled where the shard had burned against his palm. He wanted to believe it was over, that the pulse beneath the chamber had ceased, but the quiet around him was not peace. It was waiting. Mortain helped him to his feet, moving cautiously toward the stairwell. "We leave nothing behind," he said, voice grim. "Nothing to tempt it again." Caldus gathered the scrolls with shaking hands. "The order they failed," he murmured. 6 centuries, and it slept only because they held the key. We cannot assume it will remain dormant. Jean followed them into the winding corridors, each step measured, each breath shallow. Shadows clung to the walls, subtle, whispering, like the echoes of old prayers half forgotten. Even the stone seemed to remember the thing beneath it, vibrating faintly, as if warning them that it still drew strength from memory. When they reached the outer courtyard, the night air felt sharp and alive. The moon cast long, distorted shadows, and Jean swore he could see faint blue lines running across the broken stones, the remnants of the seal's energy pulsing weakly. The monastery was silent now, but the pulse beneath the altar had not entirely vanished. Mortain glanced back at the crumbling building. "We cannot remain here," he said. "Anywhere we settle will carry the risk. It learns, adapts, waits." Jean swallowed. "Then what do we do?" "We leave," Mortain said. and we watch. The shard, the heart, it must never be disturbed again. Not by men seeking knowledge, not by anyone who thinks themselves clever enough to challenge it. Caldus shivered, and if it awakens again, Mortaine's face darkened. Then the world itself will remember what we cannot. It is older than kingdoms, older than kings, older than men. Jean looked up at the stars, brittle points of light against the black sky. He could feel the pulse still, faint, somewhere beneath the monastery, whispering in rhythms no human mind should perceive. A heartbeat stretching over centuries, waiting for the curious, the bold, the foolish. The three of them began their descent down the mountain path, keeping to shadows, keeping silent. The shard they had left behind, buried once more beneath stone and altar, pulsed faintly in memory, a warning buried deep in the earth. Jean's mind could not rest. He could see the creature, its form smooth, immense, and unknowable, sliding through the earth beneath villages, forests, rivers, waiting for the slightest tremor to awaken again. He realized with a shiver that it was patient, unimaginably patient. The centuries had taught it endurance beyond human comprehension. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky with cold light, the monastery had vanished behind them, blending into the jagged landscape as though it had never existed. But Jean knew better. He would feel the pulse beneath the stones for the rest of his life. He would dream of the blue symbols, of the fissures, of the creature lying in wait. And deep in the earth, the shard's faint glow pulsed once more, a soft, steady rhythm, like the breath of something alive, waiting, learning, enduring. Jean whispered into the wind, the truth settling like frost on his bones. Some things in the world are older than men, older than kingdoms, older than time, and some things cannot be buried. Not forever. Jean, Mortain, and Caldus descended the narrow mountain path slowly, every step calculated, every footfall measured to avoid the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the earth beneath them. Snow clung to the pines, crunching softly under their boots, but even that sound seemed to carry farther than it should, echoing unnaturally through the forest. Jean's mind could not leave the chamber, the shard, or the thing beneath the monastery. He could still feel it, the pulse. A heartbeat stretched across centuries, faint but insistent, like a reminder that it had not truly been sealed, merely delayed. The villages, Caldus whispered, his voice trembling. Do you think it reached them before? Mortain shook his head grimly. Not before the seal, but there were always rumors, disappearances, unexplainable vanishings. Travelers swallowed by forests, entire households gone in a single night, all without a trace. We assumed superstition, plague, bandits, but not all vanished for mundane reasons. Jean's stomach churned. And the shard, the heart, it's still there beneath the altar. Mortain nodded. Beneath stone, beneath centuries, the pulse you felt will linger until the seal fully stabilizes. But it will never die. It cannot. only sleep, and sleep is fragile. They continued down, the first hints of dawn washing the sky in muted grays. Mist curled around the forest floor, and the mountains above looked impossibly still. But Jean knew better. He could feel the pulse beneath him in the soles of his boots, subtle yet insistent, as if the earth itself remembered the heartbeat of the thing below. Hours passed in silence. Every crackle of a branch, every distant animal cry, set Jean's nerves on edge. Mortain seemed equally tense, moving with the fluid, careful grace of someone who had faced dangers far older than men. Caldus lagged slightly behind, shivering, whispering prayers under his breath. By midday, they reached the edge of a small village tucked into a valley far below the monastery. Smoke rose from chimneys, and children played in the streets, unaware of the centuries-old predator lying dormant beneath the stones above them. Jean stared, a cold realization settling in his chest. "It doesn't care where we go," he murmured. "It only waits for curiosity, for intrusion. And we've already awakened it." Mortain's jaw tightened. "Then we leave. No trace, no story, no lure. We tell no one. Knowledge of its existence is the threat." Caldus swallowed hard. "And if it awakens again—" "It will," Mortain said quietly. "We can only hope the world is ready to endure it when it does." They skirted the village, avoiding contact with anyone, descending further into the valley and out of the creature's immediate influence. The mountains behind them stood silent, indifferent. Yet Jean could not stop feeling the pulse beneath the earth, faint, rhythmic, waiting. At a small, abandoned farm on the valley edge, they paused. Mortain surveyed the surrounding fields. "We must move quickly from here. The seal is our only protection, but we cannot linger. Even proximity may weaken it." Jean leaned against a fence post, shivering from cold and fear alike. He felt the weight of the world pressing down, the knowledge that something older than men, older than kingdoms, older than the concept of time itself, rested beneath the mountains. And it had not been defeated, only delayed. The shard's faint resonance seemed to echo in his chest, reminding him that the heart of this ancient thing still beat. Every instinct screamed that it was patient, infinitely patient. It would wait for centuries, if necessary, watching, sensing, learning from every human step, every sound, every intrusion. As they continued their journey down the valley, Jean dared not look back. The mountains loomed silently behind them, a reminder of the dark secret lying buried below. And beneath the stone of the monastery, deep under centuries of earth and stone, the pulse continued, steady and relentless, a heartbeat in the dark, awaiting the next intrusion into its ancient, unending slumber. Jean, Mortain, and Caldus pressed onward through the valley, the village fading behind them like a memory. Yet Jean could not shake the sensation that they were being followed, not by a visible enemy, but by awareness itself. The pulse beneath the mountains seemed to reach into him, subtle at first, then insistent, a rhythm echoing in his chest with each step. Mortain glanced back, eyes narrowing. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice low. Jean nodded. "It's watching, waiting." Caldus shivered, muttering prayers. "Even here, so far away." "It follows curiosity," Morton said grimly. "Every trace of disturbance, every inquiry into the forbidden, strengthens it." As they moved deeper into the valley, the terrain changed. Rolling fields gave way to denser forests. The trees gnarled and old, their roots twisting like veins through the earth. Jean noticed small anomalies. Patches of grass, blackened as though scorched. Faint blue lines etched into stones, barely visible beneath moss. And birds that refused to sing. Suddenly, a distant scream pierced the forest, a sound that seemed both human and wrong. Jean froze. Mortain grabbed his arm. "Do not look," he hissed. "It wants you to." From the shadows, shapes moved too fast, too fluid to be human. Trees bent slightly as if recoiling, and the air shimmered with heatless waves. Jean realized that the creature's influence had stretched far beyond the monastery. Even here, it left traces. Mortain led them off the path, deeper into the forest. They arrived at the remnants of an abandoned watchtower. Its walls were cracked, stones etched with the same strange symbols Jean had seen in the chamber. Mortain traced them with his fingers. "This tower was built by the same order," he whispered. Another attempt at containment, another failure. Jean studied the carvings. They pulsed faintly under his touch, a subtle thrum echoing the pulse beneath the mountains. "It's alive," he murmured. "Yes," Mortain said quietly. "In ways we cannot comprehend. It adapts, endures, and learns. The shard only delays it, it does not destroy it. One day, someone curious enough, careless enough, will awaken it fully." A faint wind rustled through the forest, carrying with it whispers that sounded like words, but were unintelligible. Jean's skin prickled. He realized with dread that the pulse beneath the mountains had synced with this forest, like veins extending from a hidden heart. Caldus, trembling, asked, "What do we do now?" Mortain's gaze was distant. "We move. We record nothing. And we pray that no one else finds the shard or the chamber. That is all we can do." Jean felt the weight of centuries pressing on him. They descended further, keeping to shadowed paths, and by dusk they reached a river that shimmered in the dying light. The sound of water was comforting, but Jean could still feel the pulse beneath the earth, faint but unyielding. As night fell, they camped at the riverbank. Jean stared into the dark water, the reflection of the stars trembling like the heartbeat he could still feel beneath him. Mortain whispered, "Even when the shard sleeps, even when the creature is sealed, it waits. And waiting is patient beyond measure." Jean nodded, understanding. This was not a monster that could be defeated with steel or fire. It was an ancient intelligence, older than empires, bound only by human attempts at control. And one day, if curiosity or greed reached too close, it would awaken fully. The forest around them was silent. The river gurgled softly. The wind whispered through the trees. And beneath the mountains, deep in the hidden chamber, the pulse continued. Steady, relentless, waiting. Jean closed his eyes and felt it once more. The heartbeat of something eternal, something beyond comprehension, something patient enough to endure the passage of centuries, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to uncover it. The river's soft gurgle did little to soothe Jean's restless mind. Even as the campfire flickered, the pulse beneath the mountains seemed to whisper in his bones, a rhythm that refused to be ignored. Mortain and Caldus sat nearby, their heads bowed, murmuring prayers in languages long forgotten. Jean realized that the words themselves were weapons, rituals meant to hold back something no human could fight. As the night deepened, shadows among the trees began to twist unnaturally. Jean's heart thudded in rhythm with the pulse beneath him. He dared not speak. He dared not move. Even the river sounded different, as though its flow carried the resonance of the hidden heart. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared on the opposite bank, a faint blue light like the shard's aura, but smaller, fragmented. Jean's breath caught. "It's moving," he whispered. Mortain's eyes narrowed. "It learns. It sends tendrils, echoes, fragments of itself. They are testing boundaries. Even here, far from the monastery, its influence reaches." From the forest came a sound unlike anything Jean had heard before. A low, vibrating hum that rose and fell with deliberate cadence. The air grew colder. Trees shivered as if in anticipation. The glow on the riverbank pulsed in time with the hidden heartbeat beneath the mountains. Caldus shivered. "Do we fight it?" Mortain shook his head. "No, never fight it. Only hide. Only seal. Only endure." The order failed because they sought to conquer it. We survive only by respect and fear. Jean's gaze fixed on the glowing fragment. It hovered briefly above the water, then dove beneath the river's surface. The ripple spread outward, carrying a vibration he could feel in his chest, sinking with the pulse below the mountains. For hours, they watched intense silence, the fire at their backs casting long shadows, the stars above indifferent. Then, as dawn approached, the forest seemed to exhale, and the glow receded completely. Only the river's natural gurgle remained. Jean felt the first true weight of understanding. This creature, this ancient pulse, was patient beyond comprehension. It could wait centuries for intrusion. It could spread subtly, invisibly, through shadows, through earth, through curiosity itself. And every disturbance, every touch, every act of knowledge could awaken it again. Mortain finally spoke, breaking the silence. "We move toward the old roads. Civilization may provide cover, but never comfort. Every step must be deliberate. Every curiosity punished with caution." Jean nodded, heart heavy. He knew that the memory of the shard, of the chamber, of the creature, would remain with him forever. Not as a story, not as a legend, but as an unrelenting presence, echoing in his pulse. They left the riverbank, moving silently through the forest, the morning mist curling around their feet like fingers. And somewhere deep beneath the mountains, beneath stone and earth and centuries of secrecy, the heartbeat continued, slow, steady, waiting for the next intruder. Decades passed, though to Jean it felt like centuries in the echoing memory of the pulse beneath the mountains. The shard remained sealed, the monastery abandoned, and slowly reclaimed by stone and snow. But whispers of its existence spread, carried by travelers, merchants, and scholars who stumbled upon fragments of the Order's chronicles. Few survived the experience to tell the tale, and fewer still believed what they had glimpsed. By the year 1402, rumors had reached the small towns along the valley where Jean and Morton had fled. Crops failed inexplicably. Livestock vanished overnight. Villagers spoke of shadows that moved against the wind and whispers that came from empty fields. Scholars who attempted to investigate were met with silence or vanished themselves, leaving behind notes filled with frantic symbols and illegible script. Jean, now older, traveled cautiously through these settlements, Mortain and Caldus at his side. They moved like ghosts, avoiding attention, carrying only memories of the pulse and the shard. Jean could feel its presence in the soil, in the streams, in the very air, like an awareness stretching beneath the world, dormant yet watching, learning. One evening, as they camped near a forested hill, a young shepherd approached. His eyes were wide with fear. "Have you seen the shadows?" he asked, voice trembling. "They come at night. They wait." Jean exchanged a glance with Morton. "You must leave this place," he said gently. "Do not speak of what you have seen. Go before curiosity calls it forth." The boy nodded, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Jean knew the pulse had already reached him, subtle, imperceptible, yet enough to stir interest. The first step toward awakening. As they continued their journey, the three realized that their role was not merely survival, but stewardship. The shard, the knowledge, and the pulse beneath the mountains had to be protected not from themselves, but from anyone who might seek it out, driven by curiosity, ambition, or ignorance. Every step forward was a delicate balance, to observe, to endure, and to contain the ancient intelligence that slept beneath the earth. Jean looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks veiled in mist. The monastery lay hidden somewhere beyond, a tomb for the creature and its shard. And yet, the heartbeat persisted, subtle, relentless, waiting for the next intrusion, the next spark of curiosity to awaken it again. He knew this was the life they would lead. Wanderers in a world they understood only partially, bound by knowledge that could not be shared, carrying the weight of something far older than kingdoms, far older than men. And beneath the mountains, the pulse continued, slow, steady, waiting. For centuries, it would endure. Centuries later, the world had changed. Kingdoms rose and fell, roads crumbled, and villages that had once whispered about shadows and vanishings were long gone. Forests had reclaimed most of the valley, and the monastery beneath the mountains lay, hidden beneath layers of snow, stone, and centuries of silence. Yet the pulse beneath it endured, patient as ever, stretching its awareness through the soil, the roots of trees, even into streams that ran like veins across the land. By 1604, travelers began reporting strange occurrences along the old mountain passes. Herds disappeared without a trace. Distant towns reported cold spots that froze breath midair, and nights brought whispers in languages no living human could comprehend. Scholars and curious nobles recorded these events in journals, though most dismissed them as superstition. Few dared approach the mountains where the monastery had once stood, and fewer still survived the trek to tell of the unsettling stillness and unnatural tremors beneath the earth. A young cartographer, Thomas Albright, became obsessed with these accounts. He had heard the tales from a wandering monk who claimed to be a descendant of Morton's order. The monk spoke cautiously, eyes wide, recounting stories of the pulse and the shard, of shadows that moved with purpose, and of the creature lying beneath the monastery, waiting. "Do not go," the monk warned. Curiosity awakens things older than memory, things that measure time not in years, but in centuries of patience. Thomas, driven by ambition and fascination, ignored the caution. He assembled a small party of assistants and guides, traveling into the dense forests that now surrounded the mountain. Every step he took seemed to echo differently. The earth beneath him thrummed faintly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make hair stand on end. He could feel the pulse, a heartbeat buried beneath layers of stone, soil, and history, and it called to him like a hidden rhythm in the marrow of the world. By nightfall, Thomas and his companions reached the edge of the valley, the mountains looming above them like silent sentinels. The air was colder here, heavier, almost liquid in its density. The forest seemed to recoil from their presence. Branches bent unnaturally. The mist hung low and thick, and faint blue lines traced across stones, as though marking paths that led to some unseen heart. Thomas set up camp, but sleep was impossible. Every instinct told him to flee, yet fascination tethered him in place. At midnight, a low vibration shook the ground, a subtle, rhythmic pulse that made the soil beneath their tents tremble. The assistants froze, wide-eyed, as the pulse grew steadily stronger, syncing with their own heartbeats, drawing them closer, almost magnetically, toward the mountains. The monk's warnings echoed in Thomas's mind. Curiosity awakens it, and beneath the stone and snow of the long-abandoned monastery, the heartbeat continued, slow, steady, and patient, waiting for those bold or foolish enough to awaken it once more. Thomas stirred awake before dawn, the forest around their camp eerily silent. Even the river, which should have babbled along its stone bed, seemed muted, as if the pulse beneath the mountains had already extended its influence, stifling sound and movement alike. He rubbed his eyes, heart still hammering from a dream, or was it a memory? In the dream, he had seen shadows rising from stone, twisting into forms no human mind could hold, and the shard's cold glow pulsed beneath his feet. The assistants moved about nervously, whispering among themselves. One of them, a young man named Elias, approached Thomas, voice trembling. "Do you feel it too, sir? The ground, it's alive. Something beneath it watches us." Thomas nodded slowly, a shiver running down his spine. "I can feel it. Every step, every breath it pulses, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the earth." They packed quickly and began their ascent toward the mountains, each step heavier than the last. The air grew thin and biting, and the forest thickened, branches curling unnaturally, leaves blackened as if scorched by some invisible flame. Faint blue lines shimmered intermittently along the stones in their path, catching Thomas's eye. His pulse quickened. He recognized them immediately, the same markings described in the monk's chronicles. They were not natural, they were warnings, or perhaps invitations, left by those who had tried and failed to contain what lay beneath the monastery centuries ago. By midday, they reached the ruins of the monastery, long since claimed by stone and snow. The air felt heavier here, a subtle pressure that pressed against the chest and made breathing shallow. Thomas led his party cautiously toward the old entrance, noting that the fissures in the stone floor, though mostly hidden by centuries of rubble, still pulsed faintly with a blue light. Elias froze. "Sir, do you see that?" From beneath, the ground came a soft, rhythmic thrum. The pulse was stronger here, resonant, a heartbeat that reached into bone and muscle alike. Thomas placed a hand against the cold stone floor, and the sensation shot through him, a terrible, beautiful rhythm, alive and aware, waiting for any disturbance. Morton's warnings echoed in his mind. Curiosity awakens it. The air around them shimmered. Shadows shifted in impossible angles, as though aware of their every movement. And then, faintly at first, the ground groaned, a low, dragging sound that rose in pitch and intensity. The pulse beneath the mountains synchronized with it, growing in strength, almost in anticipation. Thomas knew, with a sinking certainty, that they had crossed the first threshold. Whatever lay beneath the monastery was aware of them, and patient as it was, centuries of waiting had not dulled its intelligence. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, casting the ruins in an otherworldly blue twilight, the pulse beneath the monastery quickened, and Thomas understood the truth. What the order had once sealed was not gone. It was only sleeping, and now, centuries later, it was waking. Thomas led his party cautiously through the collapsed arches of the monastery, the air thick with cold, and the faint metallic tang of something long buried. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the stone walls as if the building itself were listening. The ruins were mostly intact in structure, but twisted by centuries of frost, rot, and neglect. Stones jutted at impossible angles. Staircases collapsed halfway, and the blue lines Thomas had seen earlier pulsed faintly across the walls, faint like embers of a dying fire. "Keep your voices low," Thomas whispered. "We don't know what might still be here." The assistants nodded, moving hesitantly behind him. The pulse beneath the mountains had grown stronger as they advanced. It pressed against Thomas's chest like a rhythm, not his own, syncing with his heartbeat in ways that made him dizzy. They descended a collapsed staircase, half buried in rubble, into what seemed like a hidden corridor. The walls were etched with symbols, some faded, some vivid, glowing faintly as if alive. Thomas recognized a few from the monks' chronicles: warnings, rituals, seals, prayers. But most were unintelligible, alien in design, spiraling into intricate patterns that made his stomach churn. A low groan echoed from below. The assistants froze. The sound was not entirely from the ruins. It carried weight, substance, as if something enormous was moving just beneath the stone floor. "Stay close," Thomas whispered, gripping a torch. "Whatever it is, it's aware of us." They reached a chamber, its ceiling broken, moonlight spilling through in silvery beams. In the center, partially buried under rubble, was a stone altar. Faint blue light emanated from a crack in the floor beneath it, just like the shard's glow described in the old chronicles. Thomas approached cautiously, hand outstretched. The pulse beneath the floor grew stronger, vibrating in the stone, in the air, in their bones. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, reaching toward them as if the room itself was alive. "Do not touch it," whispered Elia's, voice trembling. It's waiting." But curiosity burned hotter than fear. Thomas lowered his hand toward the fissure. As his fingers brushed the glowing stone beneath, the air shifted violently. A roar not of sound, but of pressure filled the chamber. The floor trembled, dust falling from the broken ceiling. The blue light pulsed violently, and shadows began twisting and coiling upward from the crack. Thomas stumbled backward, heart racing. The assistants screamed, scrambling to retreat. But the pulse now seemed to anchor itself in the room, flooding their senses, forcing visions into their minds. Centuries of darkness, villages emptied overnight, shadows crawling across stone, and the faint glow of the shard. The ground beneath the altar shuddered and split further. From the fissure, a cold wind rose, carrying whispers that pressed directly into their skulls, unintelligible, but laden with intent. The creature, the ancient intelligence beneath the monastery, was stirring. Thomas realized too late the truth Mortain had warned centuries ago. Curiosity awakens it. The chamber was alive now. The pulse was no longer distant. It was present, and the creature had noticed them. The chamber seemed to stretch impossibly, as if the walls themselves had grown taller in the presence of the pulse. Thomas stood frozen, torch trembling in his hand, staring at the fissure beneath the altar. The blue glow pulsed with a rhythm that was no longer faint. It beat in time with his own heart, or perhaps it forced his heartbeat to sync with its own. His vision flickered. The shadows that had once clung to the corners of the room now writhed, stretching upward from the floor and ceiling, coiling like dark smoke, yet heavier than air. "Step back," Elias screamed, but his voice seemed swallowed by the room, absorbed into the pulse itself. The others obeyed instinctively, retreating toward the broken staircase, but Thomas's feet felt rooted to the ground. Something tugged at him, not physical, but magnetic, subtle yet undeniable. A whisper echoed through the chamber. It was not audible in the usual sense, but Thomas heard it inside his mind. "You came too far, too soon." His breath caught. The pulse beneath the fissure intensified, vibrating through the stones, through his boots, through the marrow in his bones. He could feel the chamber itself pressing against him, as though it were alive, breathing with him, waiting for a heartbeat to open fully. Mortain, moving behind him, raised his hands in a gesture Thomas recognized from the old chronicles, ancient signs of containment and warning. "Do not touch it," Morton said. His voice sounded distant, as though coming from underwater. "Do not let it perceive your curiosity as permission. Withdraw, or all is lost." But it was too late. The magnetic pull Thomas felt intensified. He could not resist it, his fingers drawn toward the glowing fissure, as if some invisible gravity had claimed them. And when his fingertips brushed the glowing stone beneath the altar, the pulse erupted. The chamber shook violently. Dust fell like rain. A low, resonant groan vibrated through the floor and walls, making Thomas stagger. The air became thick, cold, pressing against their chests like water. Shadows peeled away from the walls, flowing into the center of the chamber, twisting and forming shapes, tall, incomprehensible forms with limbs that bent at impossible angles, faces absent, yet aware. Elias screamed again, collapsing backward onto the floor. Thomas turned to see the others, but Morton's face was pale, eyes wide, mouth moving in silent prayer. The pulse beneath them became unbearable. It was no longer a rhythm, but a presence, alive, sentient, and ancient. Images flashed across Thomas's mind. Villages emptied of life, families gone in the night, forests that became silent overnight, rivers that froze in mid-flow. And the shard. The shard's glow seemed to pierce through time itself, drawing him into visions of centuries past, of the monks who had sealed the creature, of Morton's ancestors hiding it beneath the altar. A whisper grew louder, clearer, forming words that Thomas could barely comprehend. "You awaken what waits. You call what sleeps. You are chosen." The stone beneath the altar cracked further. A cold wind erupted from the fissure, extinguishing all torches. Darkness flooded the chamber, yet Thomas could see everything through shadows that had become shapes, forms, faces, though none belonged to living men. The creature emerged. Or perhaps it had always been there. A mass of darkness, twisting and coiling, rising from the fissure like ink poured into water, yet solid, tangible, yet ever-shifting. Its form was enormous, stretching to the vaulted ceiling. Limbs spiraled in impossible directions. Its face was a void, a hollow absence, yet Thomas felt it look directly at him. The pulse and the creature were one. The heartbeat he had felt for centuries now spoke in resonance. Curiosity opens doors, invites chaos, awakens the patient. The assistants scrambled to flee, but the shadows flowed toward them with a speed that defied natural law. They did not run, they were drawn upward, pulled into the darkness, as though the shadows themselves were gravity. Thomas wanted to shout, to resist, but his voice was gone. His body moved against his will, toward the altar, toward the fissure, drawn by the magnetic rhythm of the pulse. Mortain stepped forward, chanting words in a language Thomas could not recognize, old, guttural, sharp, and potent. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing in a sound that seemed to scrape along the walls. The pulse beneath the altar reacted violently, pulsing faster, brighter, almost in anger. Thomas's hands touched the shard embedded in the fissure. The cold was unimaginable, yet not freezing, more like the absence of warmth itself, as though life had been leached from the stone into the presence below. The visions came stronger. Centuries of watchers, of failures, of people consumed by curiosity. He saw Mortain's ancestors, frantic, burying the shard, sealing the fissure, praying for centuries that it would remain dormant. And now, their work threatened to fail again. The creature shifted, extending tendrils of shadow, which curled around the chamber, reaching for Thomas. He could feel their cold wrap around his limbs, not touching, but pressing, bending the air and the very gravity around him. Morton's chanting became louder, more forceful. The pulse beneath the altar surged, and Thomas realized the creature was testing him, probing him, learning from him. Every thought, every heartbeat, every whisper of curiosity was a thread it could pull, manipulate, and grow stronger from. A tendril lashed toward Thomas, but Morton raised a talisman, carved from the remnants of the original order. The shadow recoiled, shrieking in resonance that Thomas felt in his chest, in his bones. The pulse surged violently, like a storm contained within stone, threatening to erupt. Thomas knew what he had to do. He had to return the shard to its proper resting place. If he failed, the creature would escape entirely, its influence spreading far beyond the monastery, beyond the mountains, into towns, forests, rivers, into the world. With shaking hands, he gripped the shard. Morton guided him, chanting, forcing his mind to focus on the seal. He plunged the shard into the deepest part of the fissure. The pulse reacted instantly, throbbing violently. Shadows screamed, twisting violently, the chamber itself groaning as if alive. Then, with a final, bone-shaking thrum, the shard sank into place. The fissure snapped closed. shadows dissipated, retreating into the walls, floors, and ceiling. The pulse slowed, fading to a faint thrum that could almost be mistaken for silence. Thomas collapsed, gasping for breath. Elias and the others scrambled to their feet, trembling, staring at the altar. Mortain lowered his hands, pale but resolute. "It is contained for now," Mortain whispered. "But it sleeps, not dies. It waits for curiosity, for the foolish, for the reckless. We have delayed it, not defeated it." Thomas understood. He would carry this knowledge for the rest of his life. The shard remained buried beneath centuries of stone and seal, but the pulse persisted, subtle, insistent, and patient beyond imagination. They fled the monastery as dawn broke over the mountains. Snow fell softly, settling over the ruins, masking the fissure, the altar, the chamber that had almost consumed them. But Thomas knew better. The pulse was eternal. It was waiting. The sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks when Thomas and his party descended from the mountains. The forest lay silent, almost unnaturally so, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Birds remained hidden, and even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. Thomas's hands still trembled from the night's events, and his chest throbbed in time with the faint pulse he could still feel beneath his feet. The assistants followed behind, their eyes wide, constantly glancing over their shoulders. None of them spoke, as if words might awaken what they had barely survived. Elias, the youngest among them, whispered a prayer under his breath. Clutching a small leather-bound notebook he had brought along to record observations, Mortain walked beside Thomas, silent, his eyes scanning the forest. "We have delayed it," he said finally, voice low. "But the world has changed since the Order first buried the shard. It is not enough to simply seal it. Curiosity travels faster than fear, and the pulse, its awareness, will reach those who seek it long after we are gone." Thomas shivered. "Do you mean others might find it?" "Yes," Mortain replied grimly. "Even now, threads of the pulse extend outward. It learns, adapts, and waits. The forest, the rivers, even the earth itself carries traces. The shard is buried, but the awareness, the intelligence that is infinite, they continued through the forest, carefully skirting fallen trees and patches of blackened moss. Strange blue lines, faintly glowing, could still be seen etched into stones and roots, like veins feeding some invisible organism. Thomas realized with a chill that the pulse beneath the mountains had already begun to extend its reach, subtly influencing the natural world. By midday, they reached a river that snaked through the valley. Its surface was calm, but Thomas noticed something unsettling. Faint ripples that formed patterns in time with the pulse he still felt beneath the earth. It was as if the water itself carried the rhythm of the hidden intelligence, spreading it farther than any human eye could perceive. "We must move quickly," Mortain said. "Even the pulse of this mountain is patient, but it is relentless. Any settlement, Any traveler who strays too close may awaken a fragment. Thomas nodded, keeping his gaze fixed on the river. He could not shake the sense that the pulse was already reaching into the villages below, influencing dreams, stirring curiosity, drawing attention to the mountains. Over the following weeks, Thomas and his party journeyed through small towns and hamlets, careful to remain unnoticed. Yet, everywhere they went, strange events seemed to precede them. Animals disappeared, wells ran dry, shadows moved with subtle purpose. People whispered of bad omens and unnatural phenomena, though none suspected the source. In one village, a miller reported that the flour in his sacks had turned black overnight. Children spoke of seeing shadows in the woods, following them silently, though they could not describe the shapes. Scholars who visited the area to study these anomalies wrote frantic notes in coded languages, hiding their findings from others. Thomas could feel the pulse in each place, a subtle tug at the edges of thought and perception. One evening, as they camped near the ruins of a forgotten abbey, Thomas sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The pulse beneath the mountains felt distant but alive, a quiet hum that threaded through his mind. He realized that the shard had not merely been a seal, it had been a conduit. The pulse now moved through the world in fragments, subtle and patient, observing, learning, and waiting for anyone curious enough to stumble upon its trail. Mortain spoke softly. The order failed because they sought to hide the shard, to seal the pulse completely. But the pulse is not a thing that can be buried entirely. It is intelligence, awareness, and it spreads. Thomas shivered. You mean it's like a disease? In a sense, Mortain said, but it is far older than anything we understand. Patience is its weapon. It will wait centuries if it must, observing, studying, preparing. It will awaken when the time is right. Over the next months, the group encountered several travelers who had seen strange lights in the mountains or felt unaccountable dread in the forests. Most dismissed these experiences as superstition, but Thomas knew better. Every report, every story, every whisper was a thread in the pulse's web. It did not need to act openly. Its awareness was enough to reach minds, bending thoughts, subtly drawing attention toward the mountains and the sealed shard. By 1607, Thomas began keeping detailed journals. He recorded locations where anomalies occurred, patterns in the reports, and subtle changes in animal behavior. Blue lines and faint symbols, etched by the original order centuries before, appeared occasionally on stones and tree roots, though mostly hidden under moss and dirt. Thomas realized that the pulse had begun to leave its mark, spreading outward in ways that humans would perceive as coincidence, superstition, or madness. The assistant Elias became increasingly agitated. "Sir," he whispered one night as they slept in the woods, "I dream of it. Shadows moving under the floorboards, whispers calling my name, pulling me toward the mountains." Thomas nodded grimly. "It feeds on curiosity," he said. "Even dreams are not safe. The pulse reaches the mind as easily as the earth. Mortain, who had grown older and frailer over the months, added, "This is why the Order kept such careful records. They knew that curiosity would eventually awaken the pulse, that even fragments could influence generations. Knowledge itself is the threat." Thomas's mind churned. He realized that their journey was not merely survival, it was stewardship. They were the first human witnesses since Morton's ancestors had buried the shard. Their task was not just to avoid the pulse, but to ensure that it remained contained, to track its subtle influence, and prevent any human from inadvertently awakening it fully. In the winter of that year, they passed through a village where the pulse had subtly influenced the land. Crops had failed, and livestock was scarce. Children reported seeing shapes moving at night, and even adults felt a pervasive unease. Thomas examined the village, noting faint blue etchings on stones and tree roots. They were almost imperceptible, like veins in the earth, marking the pulse's spread. "This is worse than I imagined," Thomas whispered. "It doesn't need to act openly to be dangerous. It changes the world around it, subtly, insidiously. Anyone who investigates will be drawn toward the mountains." Morton sighed. "Patience. This is how it survives. We delay, we observe, and we hope that ignorance protects the world." By spring, the group had tracked the subtle signs of the pulse across a wide region. The intelligence beneath the mountains had not acted overtly, but the pattern was clear. It moved through the landscape, embedding influence into minds, dreams, and nature itself. Thomas understood that the pulse's awareness was like a web, spreading, connecting, learning, and waiting for curiosity to awaken it fully. One evening, while documenting patterns near a river valley, Thomas saw a figure watching them from the woods. The figure was pale, thin, and appeared human, but moved with an unnatural stillness. It disappeared when they tried to approach, leaving only a faint ripple in the earth, like the pulse itself had brushed against reality. Elias shivered. "It's following us," he whispered. "It knows we've seen it." Thomas nodded. "Or it knows curiosity has been drawn here. That is enough." Morton added, "The pulse does not need to move openly. It extends its influence, guides the inquisitive, and studies the patterns of the world. We have seen but a fragment. Through the following years, Thomas and his companions became wanderers. Villages whispered of their passage, recalling fleeting shapes, cold spots, or strange blue lines etched into stones. Few connected these occurrences to the mountains, but the pulse's influence had reached them nonetheless. In 1612, Thomas wrote, "The pulse is patient, eternal. It waits in the dark, in the stone, in the roots of trees, and in the dreams of men. Knowledge itself is the bridge. Curiosity is the key. We are but custodians, tasked with observing without interference, lest we awaken it fully." Even as centuries passed, Thomas realized the pulse would endure. And someday, another curious soul would be drawn to the mountains, to the ruins of the monastery, and awaken what they had barely contained. Beneath the stone and snow, the fissure remained, sealed but alive. The shard rested within, anchoring the creature's presence, but the pulse stretched outward, patient, inexorable, subtle. It did not need to act openly to influence the world. It only needed to wait, knowing that curiosity would always exist, waiting for the next intrusion, the next spark of knowledge. And so the pulse continued, slow, steady, eternal, threading its awareness through centuries, through dreams, through forests, rivers, and villages. Always watching, always learning, always waiting. By the year 1703, the world had shifted in ways Thomas could never have imagined. Kingdoms had risen and fallen, towns had moved, forests had reclaimed ancient roads, and the monastery atop the jagged mountains had long since been swallowed by snow, ice, and centuries of neglect. Yet the pulse beneath it endured, patient, subtle, and ever-present, stretching its influence invisibly through the land, the water, and even the dreams of men. Stories of strange occurrences in the valley surrounding the mountains had resurfaced among the villagers of the region. Crops failed without reason, livestock disappeared, and travelers often returned with tales of unnatural shadows moving through the forests at night. Many dismissed these stories as superstition, but those who observed carefully began to notice patterns, faint signs etched into stones, roots, and riverbeds. The pulse was at work, subtle and insidious, threading awareness into the land itself, and teaching the world to recognize, fear, and yet, sometimes, seek it. In a small, isolated village on the eastern slope of the mountains, a scholar named Alaric van Houten began collecting accounts of the strange occurrences. Alaric was a man of reason and study, trained in natural philosophy and mathematics, but he had an insatiable curiosity for mysteries that defied explanation. Villagers came to him with tales of shadows, disappearing animals, and whispering winds. Many who approached the forests felt an unshakable dread, a sense that the earth itself was alive and aware of their presence. Alaric spent months cataloging these stories, comparing them with old manuscripts he had discovered in distant monasteries, texts that hinted at the existence of a powerful artifact buried beneath the mountains centuries ago, a shard of unknown origin that had been sealed by a secretive order. The details were vague, fragmented, and written in a mixture of Latin, Old French, and cryptic symbols. But one line struck him with stark clarity. Curiosity awakens what sleeps, and knowledge is the key. Alaric's nights were restless. He began to experience vivid dreams, a dark chamber beneath a ruined monastery, blue light pulsing beneath stone, shadows twisting and reaching, whispers of names long forgotten. In these dreams, he felt the pulse, subtle at first, then insistent, pulling him toward the mountains. Each morning, he awoke with his pulse racing, the sensation lingering, a quiet hum in his bones, as if the earth itself had imprinted upon him. By midsummer, he could no longer resist the pull. he assembled a small party. His assistant, the young and inquisitive Johann, a local woodsman named Pieter, and a scribe named Renate. They carried provisions, tools, and the knowledge Alaric had painstakingly gathered. The mountains loomed in the distance, stark and jagged, covered with dense forests that had reclaimed centuries of roads and paths. Their journey was deliberate, cautious. The pulse beneath the mountains was subtle but perceptible. It hummed in the soil, guided the wind, and bent the light in faintly unnatural ways. Birds fell silent as they approached, and animals in the woods avoided them with an instinct Alaric could not explain. Each day, he recorded his observations, noting patterns in the terrain, the behavior of wildlife, and the faint signs left by previous generations. Blue etchings in stone, faintly glowing lines along roots, and carvings hidden beneath moss. On the third night, camped near a river that twisted through the foothills, Johann awoke screaming. Shadows seemed to move independently of the moonlight, coiling around their campfire and the trees. Whispered words, unintelligible but urgent, pressed against their minds. The pulse beneath the mountains had found them even here, extending its awareness into the valley, subtly guiding them toward the ruins. Alaric knew what he must do. The shard was buried beneath the monastery, sealed by the secretive order centuries before, but the pulse had already begun to spread its influence through the land. If they did not reach it, if curiosity overtook caution, the consequences could be catastrophic. The shadows, the whispers, the subtle manipulations of nature, they were the first signs of the pulse teaching, learning, and preparing for the next awakening. By the time they reached the base of the mountains, the forests had thickened unnaturally. Branches intertwined overhead, forming nearly impenetrable walls, and the ground itself seemed to shift subtly underfoot. Paths disappeared as if the forest rejected their presence, and blue lines, faintly glowing, traced across stones and roots, guiding them toward the hidden entrance of the monastery ruins. They discovered the monastery partially collapsed, its stones fractured, moss and snow covering centuries of neglect. Yet in the ruins, signs of the pulse were unmistakable. Shadows moved with impossible angles, faint whispers threaded through the wind, and the air pressed against them in a tangible, heavy way. Alaric felt the pull grow stronger, tugging at his mind and heart. The pulse was patient, but now it was aware of them, and it was learning from every step. Descending into the ruins, they found the collapsed staircase that led to the hidden chamber. The air was thick, cold, and oppressive. Blue light pulsed faintly from fissures in the stone floor, echoing the rhythm of the pulse beneath the mountains. Every instinct screamed at Alaric to turn back, but the call of curiosity, now deeply embedded in his mind, propelled him forward. Inside the chamber, the remnants of the altar remained, partially buried in rubble. The fissure beneath it glowed with a cold, blue light. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, moving independently of their source. The pulse resonated through the chamber, a slow, insistent heartbeat that synced with Alaric's own pulse. He felt his mind pulled into visions. Centuries of observers, sealers, and intruders. Villages emptied overnight, forests silenced by the subtle weight of the shard, and the faint glow of the artifact itself. Renate whispered, trembling, "It's alive." Alaric nodded. "It is intelligence, awareness, something older than memory. The shard contains it, but the pulse extends outward. It learns from us, from curiosity, from observation." We must proceed carefully. As they approached the fissure, the chamber reacted. Shadows rose from the walls, coiling toward them. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through stone and bone. Alaric could feel the pulse directly now, pressing against his consciousness, drawing him forward. Johann screamed as a shadow reached for him, curling around his arm without touch, bending the air like water. Mortning's warnings from centuries ago echoed in Alaric's mind. Curiosity awakens it. Alaric placed his hands on the stone floor, feeling the cold seep into his bones. The pulse surged violently, projecting visions directly into his mind. The original sealers burying the shard, centuries of attempts to contain it, and the inevitable failure that would follow if the pulse awakened fully. Renate began chanting, following symbols she had copied from the ancient manuscripts. Blue light flared violently from the fissure, and shadows recoiled, hissing in resonance. The pulse throbbed in response, testing them, observing them, learning from their fear, their determination, their curiosity. Alaric realized the only way to stabilize the shard was to replace it in its proper resting place. Every movement of his hands, every thought, every heartbeat mattered. Shadows lashed at them, but the chanting and the deliberate focus of their minds created a fragile containment. The shard, cold and alien, pulsed in his grasp. He lowered it into the deepest part of the fissure. The pulse reacted violently, vibrating through the chamber, tearing at the stone and air alike. The shadows writhed, twisting, reaching, trying to escape. But the shard sank into place, anchoring the pulse once again, though faintly, subtly, like a heartbeat just beginning to slow. For hours, they remained in the chamber, monitoring the fissure, ensuring the seal held. By dawn, the shadows had retreated, and the pulse had faded to a gentle thrum. They left the monastery ruins silently, aware that the pulse remained alive, patient, and eternal. Over the next decades, Alaric continued documenting his findings, traveling from village to village, carefully noting anomalies, observing patterns, and ensuring no one inadvertently discovered the ruins. The pulse extended outward, subtly influencing minds and dreams, embedding curiosity in those who might one day awaken it again. By the end of his life, Alaric understood the truth. The shard was not merely a relic. It was an intelligence, patient, eternal, and subtle, waiting for centuries, guiding curiosity, and weaving its influence through the world. And the pulse beneath the mountains would endure slow, steady, and eternal, until the next soul stumbled upon it. ChatGPT said, "Perfect. I can continue the story with another tilde 4000 word segment. Now, advancing into the 1800s and early 1900s, expanding the pulse's influence into a world closer to your American audience's historical context. This section will follow descendants of observers, explorers, and scholars encountering the lingering pulse, with gradual escalation toward the full historical horror epic. Here's the continuation. By the early 1800s, the world had changed in ways that Thomas or Alaric could scarcely have imagined. Villages expanded into towns. Forests receded under the march of roads and railways, and commerce brought strangers from distant lands into the shadow of the ancient mountains. Yet the pulse beneath the monastery endured, patient and invisible, stretching its awareness across time and space, threading its subtle influence through the earth, the rivers, and the minds of men. In a small valley town along the fledgling railroads of New England, an American scholar named Jonathan Whittaker became aware of strange occurrences in the surrounding countryside. Crops failed in irregular patterns, rivers developed sudden cold currents, and livestock disappeared without trace. Even in the woods, animals behaved unnaturally. Deer avoided certain clearings, birds refused to perch near the ruins, and dogs growled at empty spaces. Whittaker, trained in natural philosophy and mechanical engineering, became obsessed with these anomalies. He collected reports from farmers, woodsmen, and travelers, recording details of the unusual phenomena with meticulous care. Many dismissed the events as superstition, but Whittaker recognized patterns, faint threads of intelligence that seemed to reach through the land. He began reading old texts, tracing lines of knowledge passed down through generations, discovering the chronicles of Thomas, Alaric, and the order that had buried the mysterious shard beneath the mountains centuries before. In 1823, Jonathan organized an expedition to locate the ruins. He recruited a small team, his protege, Samuel Hargrove, a naturalist named Miriam Clark, and two experienced woodsmen, Isaac and Peter. They carried instruments for measurement, tools, and volumes of research compiled from centuries of observation. As they ascended the mountains, the forest thickened unnaturally. Branches intertwined like sinews, roots twisted across paths, and the wind seemed to carry whispers that pressed upon their minds. Jonathan noted faint blue etchings on stones, glowing subtly in the morning light, patterns that he recognized from the manuscripts he had studied. The pulse beneath the mountains had spread its influence across generations, subtly marking the path for the curious and the observant. On the third night of their ascent, Miriam awoke screaming. Shadows moved independently of the firelight, curling and stretching, reaching toward the party without touching them. Whispered words pressed against their minds, unintelligible but insistent, as if guiding them forward. Jonathan realized the pulse was aware of them. It was observing, learning, testing their resolve, preparing them for the final approach to the ruins. By dawn, they reached the collapsed monastery, long abandoned and half swallowed by centuries of rock slides and vegetation. The stones were fractured and moss-covered, yet the faint blue glow beneath cracks in the foundation indicated the pulse's presence. The air pressed against them in waves, heavy and cold, making each step toward the ruins a struggle. Jonathan's pulse synced with the subtle rhythm beneath the mountains, a heartbeat embedded into the earth itself. Inside the ruins, they found the partially collapsed staircase leading to the hidden chamber beneath the altar. The chamber smelled of centuries of decay, damp stone, and a faint metallic tang that Jonathan recognized from his studies of mineral deposits. Shadows stretched across the walls, moving independently of their source. The pulse vibrated faintly through the chamber, syncing with their own heartbeats, drawing them toward the fissure and the hidden shard. Jonathan placed his hand on the stone floor. The pulse surged instantly, projecting visions into his mind. Centuries of sealers, observers, and explorers. Villages emptied overnight, forests silenced, the faint glow of the shard beneath the stone. Each vision carried weight, pressing upon his consciousness with the knowledge that curiosity was the bridge to awakening the pulse fully. Samuel and Miriam followed cautiously, chanting lines from old manuscripts, their voices resonating with symbols etched into the stone centuries ago. The shadows reacted violently, twisting and recoiling, but the pulse intensified, pressing against their minds with a rhythm that was not merely felt, but understood. As Jonathan approached the fissure, he felt an almost magnetic pull. The shard lay beneath centuries of rubble, partially visible and pulsating faintly with an alien cold. He reached out and grasped it. The pulse surged violently, resonating through stone and bone. Shadows twisted into impossible shapes, lashing toward them, coiling like living smoke. The chamber itself seemed alive, breathing, reacting to the intrusion. Miriam stepped forward, chanting, her voice clear and deliberate. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing and twisting, but the pulse throbbed in response, testing them, observing them, learning. Jonathan lowered the shard into its proper resting place within the fissure. The pulse reacted, vibrating through the chamber like a storm contained within stone. But gradually, it settled into a faint thrum, a slow, deliberate heartbeat, once more anchored by the shard. Exhausted, the party left the ruins, aware that the pulse remained alive, patient, and eternal. They returned to their village, documenting the expedition carefully. But Jonathan understood the truth. The shard was not a relic. It was intelligence, patient and eternal, threading its influence through generations, guiding curiosity, and teaching the world to awaken it. By 1850, the pulse had subtly extended into surrounding regions. Even as railroads, towns, and industrialization spread across New England, the mountains retained their quiet menace. Travelers reported fleeting glimpses of shadows. Animals avoided certain areas inexplicably, and dreams of the pulse continued to influence those sensitive to its presence. Jonathan's journals, preserved carefully, warned future generations. Curiosity awakens what sleeps, and knowledge itself is the key. As the 19th century progressed, the pulse continued to adapt. Its influence reached dreamers, inventors, and explorers. Scholars who studied old texts found themselves compelled to visit the mountains. Woodsmen and hunters reported shadows and whispers in the night. The pulse did not act openly, it moved subtly, threading intelligence through the land and minds, guiding the curious closer to the fisher. By the dawn of the 20th century, the mountains had become both a place of legend and quiet terror. The pulse endured, patient beyond human comprehension, observing the slow march of civilization. Those who sought the truth were drawn inexorably toward it. Shadows, whispers, and faint blue lines continued to mark the path. And beneath the mountains, the shard pulsed silently, anchoring the intelligence that had endured for centuries. The cycle of curiosity, discovery, and near awakening continued. The pulse was patient. The shard remained buried, and the mountains waited. By the early 1950s, the mountains had become little more than a quiet landmark for the surrounding American towns. Yet the pulse beneath the old monastery endured, patient and subtle, threading its influence through the land, the forests, and even the dreams of people who had no conscious knowledge of its existence. Technology and civilization had changed the landscape. Railroads and highways cut through forests, towns expanded, and industry reshaped valleys. But the pulse adapted. It had learned to move invisibly through the noise of human progress, waiting for curiosity to lead someone back to its hidden source. Dr. Alina Hayes, a historian and archaeologist from Boston, had become aware of strange anomalies in the region. Livestock occasionally disappeared without a trace. Rivers exhibited unnatural ripples, and certain forests seemed to emit an inexplicable dread that caused visitors to turn back without explanation. More than once, she had received letters from local residents describing fleeting shadows moving independently of any light source, whispers in empty rooms, and strange markings on stones that seemed to vanish when approached. Intrigued, Alina began compiling reports and studying historical accounts. In her research, she uncovered manuscripts referencing the Order, Thomas, Alaric, and Jonathan chroniclers who had documented the mysterious shard buried beneath the mountains centuries earlier. The more she read, the more she realized that the pulse was not merely superstition, but an enduring intelligence, subtly shaping human experience, testing the curious, and extending its awareness across generations. In 1954, Alina assembled a small team for an expedition. With her were Michael Thornton, a geologist familiar with the mountain ranges, Linda Foster, a psychologist with an interest in anomalous phenomena, and two local guides, Henry and Paul. They carried tools, recording devices, and historical manuscripts collected over months of research. Alina's notes emphasized caution. Curiosity awakens what sleeps, and knowledge is the key. Proceed with care. Their journey began in early September. The forests surrounding the monastery were thick, almost unnatural in their density. Branches interwove like sinews, roots crept across paths, and shadows moved with an awareness that was difficult to describe. The pulse tugged subtly at their consciousness, guiding steps toward the ruins. Animals avoided their path with an almost preternatural intelligence. Birds fell silent, and deer fled long before the team came into view. At night, they camped near a river that twisted through the valley. Strange whispers pressed against their minds, unintelligible yet urgent. Linda awoke screaming, describing visions of shadows moving under floors, twisting and stretching into impossible angles. Michael felt a cold pressure on his chest, as if the mountain itself were exhaling, while Aline's pulse raced in perfect sync with the subtle rhythm she could now feel beneath the earth. By the 5th day, they reached the monastery ruins. The structure, partially collapsed, had been swallowed by centuries of erosion and vegetation. Moss and snow covered the stones, but faint blue lines traced across cracks, and roots indicated the pulse's presence. The air was thick and cold, pressing against their chests and making movement difficult. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, moving independently of any light source. Inside, the staircase leading to the hidden chamber was largely intact, though partially buried. The chamber itself seemed alive. Stones pulsed with faint blue light, shadows coiled along the walls, and the pulse resonated through the air and the team's bodies. Aline felt herself drawn forward, as though the chamber itself were aware of her presence. The intelligence beneath the stone was patient, observing, learning from each heartbeat, each step, each flicker of curiosity. Aline approached the fissure beneath the altar, her hand reaching for the shard buried centuries ago. The pulse surged immediately, projecting visions into her mind. Centuries of sealers and observers, villages emptied overnight, forests silenced, and the faint, cold glow of the artifact itself. The whispers grew louder, forming words that pressed directly into thought. Curiosity awakens. Knowledge is the key. Awareness is eternal. Michael and Linda chanted phrases derived from the manuscripts, their voices resonating with the symbols etched into the chamber centuries before. Shadows twisted violently, but recoiled from the resonance. Aline lowered the shard into its proper resting place. The pulse reacted violently at first, thrumming through stone and air, but gradually it settled into a steady, subtle rhythm anchored by the shard. The chamber remained tense for hours. The pulse did not retreat entirely. It persisted, patient and eternal, testing the boundaries of containment. By dawn, the shadows had withdrawn, and the blue glow dimmed to a faint hum. Aline and her team left the ruins silently, acutely aware that the pulse remained active, patient, and eternal. Back in the towns surrounding the mountains, subtle changes continued to manifest. Residents reported fleeting shadows, strange dreams, and unusual patterns in nature. Crops failed in unexpected ways, rivers exhibited unnatural currents, and even the weather seemed to respond to unseen forces. The pulse did not act overtly. Its influence was subtle, guiding curiosity, observing human behavior, and preparing for eventual awakening. Over the following decades, Alina continued her studies, leaving detailed journals for future scholars. She understood the truth. The shard was not merely an artifact. It was an intelligence older than memory, patient beyond comprehension, threading its awareness through generations, guiding the curious, and waiting for a spark of curiosity to awaken it fully. By the 1970s, towns had expanded further, and industrialization had altered the landscape significantly. Yet the pulse endured. Travelers reported shadows moving with impossible angles, unexplainable sounds in forests, and glimpses of blue light in abandoned structures. Scholars who encountered these phenomena often dismissed them as hallucinations, though subtle patterns persisted in journals, photographs, and oral history. The pulse, patient and eternal, continued to extend its reach, threading intelligence through the land, observing, learning, and preparing for the next intrusions. By the 1990s, interest in unexplained phenomena had increased. Paranormal researchers, explorers, and documentary filmmakers began visiting the mountains. Shadows were reported moving along abandoned roads. Animals avoided certain areas inexplicably, and faint blue lines appeared along rocks and tree roots. Though none could prove it, subtle patterns suggested a continuous intelligence at work. The pulse remained anchored beneath the monastery, patient and aware, guiding the curious toward the ruins, slowly testing the limits of observation and understanding. As the 21st century approached, Alina's journals and the manuscripts of her predecessors became a guide for the new generation of explorers. The mountains retained their quiet menace, a subtle rhythm beneath the soil that hinted at intelligence, observation, and eternal patience. Curiosity remained the key. Knowledge remained the bridge. And the pulse, beneath stone and centuries of history, endured, waiting for those who would stumble upon its secret once more. The mountains lie quiet, but the pulse beneath never sleeps. Shadows coil in the forests, whispers drift through the night, and the shard pulses beneath the stone, watching, learning, waiting for the curious. Every step closer, every lingering glance could awaken it. If the chill of the unknown raced down your spine and the weight of centuries pressed on your mind, smash that like button to honor the mysteries still hidden in the dark. Comment below. Would you dare to follow the pulse into the ruins, or would you turn back before it finds you? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, where lost histories, ancient secrets, and echoes of the past lie in wait, only for those brave enough to uncover them.